Hi everyone. So in my last video, I talked about the 3 threats that I think climate change poses to Singapore and why I think more people should be talking about these sorts of issues. So today I want to talk about what we can do as individuals to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Because climate change is primarily driven by greenhouse gas emissions, I'll be talking about some ways in which we can reduce our carbon output here in Singapore. Now, there are many measures that exist out there in the world. And to be clear, no one single measure will be able to undo all the damage that we have done to the earth. But a few of them taken together can help mitigate the problems that we have created so far. So my personal opinion about the best way to mitigate climate change is quite simple. Consume less stuff. You see, everything from food to flights, from gifts to garments, requires a certain amount of energy to produce. A simpler way of living equates to a lower carbon footprint just because there are less resources and less energy required to support the way that we're living. Already our lives are pretty taxing on the earth. The WWF stated that if the whole world lived with Singaporean standards of living, we require 4 Earths worth of resources in order to support the entire world. The only reason why our current overconsumption is possible is because we're using future resources in order to produce for our present lives. We will pay the price for our present day consumption in about 50 years, but meh, that's a problem for future us to figure out. Another reason why our present day overconsumption is possible is because there are other countries in the world which are under-consuming below the fair value that they should be allowed to consume. So here's the real problem. Reduced consumption runs counter, in fact directly opposite, to the way that our current political and economic systems are structured. The GDP measures the performance of a country's economy, and the only way it can grow is if production and consumption of goods and services within the economy increases over time. So consuming less stuff would seem like it would create negative economic and political outcomes under our value systems. But on the other hand, it creates positive environmental outcomes which ensures that we can continue to live on this planet until 2100. So I suppose you can see why that's a very difficult decision to make. It's not really. Grow the economy 2.5%, be around in 2100. Pretty difficult decision. Now, there are many different environmental groups that have different approaches to growth as well as human well-being. But I personally believe that exponential growth is incompatible with long-term sustainable living on this planet. If you look at any trends on Earth, it's practically impossible to find any long-term exponential growth patterns over a long period of time. The Earth simply cannot sustain exponential growth. So moving along, something that I've seen which has been shared quite widely is this image from the Science magazine that lists several ways for us to reduce our carbon footprint. Many of the solutions that it proposes relate to reduced consumption in one way or another, but I just want to focus on a few that I feel are commonly misunderstood. Now, I want to start by talking about consuming a plant-based diet, even though the carbon savings that it promises are relatively low as compared to the rest. The reason for this is because many people don't understand why this helps the environment, and a lot of times they just confuse it with the ethical implications of killing less animals. Without wading into the moral ethics of animal slaughter or butchering, I just want to talk about the purely carbon-based reasons that we should consume more plants. So this might sound scarily scientific, but the second law of thermodynamics is relevant here. Now, you don't have to fully understand what the law states, but one of its consequences is that over time, energy from all living creatures gets lost to the environment and eventually to space, and we're never able to get this energy back in any form whatsoever. The reason this is important is because at every level of the food chain, more and more energy is being lost to the environment, and in order for us to produce food, we have to input more energy in order to keep certain organisms alive. So for example, it takes significantly less energy to grow grass as compared to the cows which feed on that grass. Now, the cows themselves require many helpings of grass in order for them to grow to a size that is meaningful for our consumption. So during the cow's entire period of growth, they're losing energy when they breathe, when they walk around, when they take a dump. Anything that's related to the process of living involve energy being expended. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that you get 100 calories from eating a cow. Maybe it's a very small cow or a very unnutritious cow, whatever it is. Now, the 100 calories from beef would have taken a lot more energy to produce as compared to 100 calories from, say, grass. Obviously, I don't want to resort to eating grass, and I don't think anyone else does. But this logic applies to any other vegetable that there is. Eating lower on the food chain reduces the amount of energy that's required to feed us and produce the food that we need. Now, the energy consumption for food production wouldn't matter if all of it came from the sun. The sun is an infinite source of energy that just keeps giving and giving and giving. Well, not infinite, but in effect for us it's probably infinite. However, many parts of the modern day food chain or food production system require non-solar inputs of energy in order to sustain. So a large amount of fossil fuels are used to produce fertilizer, and a large amount of fertilizer is used to produce feed that animals such as cows or pigs feed on in order to feed us. Not to mention the huge amount of water and land that goes towards food production. So from an energy perspective, eating a plant-based diet dramatically reduces the amount of fossil fuels that are required to sustain our consumption. Now, I will be the first to admit that it is not easy moving away from meat, especially not when you come from a culture that's used to eating meat. But it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach, at least not yet. I'm currently vegetarian 2 out of 7 days a week, and it's not entirely what is needed if we're going to preserve the earth, but it's a step in the right direction. It's really difficult to ask somebody to give up everything all at once, so taking small steps towards a solution is also helpful, and you shouldn't expect people to be able to give up meat overnight. But the reality of the situation is this: if we want to live on this earth for a long period of time more, we're just going to have to move to a plant-based diet. There is no workaround around it. So the other solution that I want to talk about is having one less child. Now it's pretty obvious why this brings about the largest carbon reductions out of all the possible solutions that are proposed. Think about all the stuff that we do in a year, using carbon-based transportation, eating meals with a lot of meat, breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide every day. I'm joking about the last one, please don't stop breathing. And it's obvious why a single individual puts out so much carbon in a year. Unfortunately, modern living has a very high carbon output, and there's no way around that. So if my parents hadn't brought me into the world, my family would have a much lower carbon output than it currently does. On the downside, I wouldn't be around to make these videos, and I pretty much wouldn't be around at all. Now that might seem like a high price to pay, but honestly, I wouldn't be able to resent not being born if I wasn't born in the first place. The children that we never have are not around to berate us for not having them. So while people might say you owe it to the nation to reproduce, you kinda also owe it to the kids that you are going to have to leave them with an earth that is worth having and can be lived in. And in order for that to happen, you have to have fewer kids. There is no way around it. Now, there are two reasons why governments across the world would never embrace this solution, or at least not actively and not in the current state of affairs. First, there's the moral problem that you kinda can't go around telling people that, hey, you shouldn't have any kids. Or, borrowing from one of my favorite musicals, hello, I'm from MCYS. I'm sorry, new policy, and we will all have one child less. Now, the second reason that governments will never be willing to embrace this is because of the negative economic growth that it entails. Now, having less people means having a smaller workforce, and unless productivity miraculously doubles or triples, which it probably won't, this entails negative economic growth over time. Now, this isn't really an economic problem per se. The standard of living in a country can remain about the same, even if the GDP is falling, as long as the GDP per capita remains about the same, or could even increase. It does, however, create the social problem of an aging population. Now, while that might be an issue, there are plenty of young populations around the world that are willing to come here and help work for the aging population. And Singapore has never really been adverse to bringing in migrants to help work in the country. Yes, we might become a minority in our country, but we're pretty much on the way there anyway. In all honesty, this is a really complex solution with a lot of different consequences that I won't be able to explore in one video. But in the interest of keeping it brief, having less children is a possible solution as long as governments embrace negative economic growth before the current economic system strips the world of all resources and manufactures a climate crisis for us all. So that's all for this video. In the next video, I'm planning to talk about air travel and examine the amount of carbon that it puts into the environment. So if you like this video, please like it down below. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And also like the page Climate Concern on Facebook. If you think that this is an important issue, please share it with your friends, your family, anybody who you still want to be alive and be living on this earth in the future. And that's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one.